There is a question that civilization has been asking itself for as long as civilization has existed, and has never quite managed to answer to its own satisfaction. It is not a complicated question. It does not require advanced education or specialized knowledge or any particular framework to understand. A child can ask it. A dying person asks it. Every human being who has ever lain awake at 3 in the morning with something unnamed pressing on their chest has asked it, in one form or another, in whatever language their particular life has given them. The question is this: what is the relationship between having things and being happy? Between acquiring and arriving? Between the life that looks like the answer from the outside and the life that feels like the answer from the inside? Because these two things, looking like the answer and feeling like the answer, are not the same. And the distance between them is where most human suffering quietly lives. This is a story about two men who lived in the same town at the same time and whose lives formed, without either of them planning it or naming it, one of the oldest and most instructive contrasts in the human experience. One of them had everything the world measures success by. The other had almost none of it. And if you had to guess, standing outside either of their doors, which one was happy, you would be wrong. Most people are. The world is very good at making the wrong door look like the right one. The rich man's name was Haroun. He had built his wealth the way most wealth is built, through a combination of genuine intelligence, relentless work, good timing, and the willingness to sacrifice things that seemed, at the time of the sacrificing, like they could be recovered later. Sleep, health, relationships, the slow pleasures of an unhurried life. He had sacrificed them with the calm certainty of a man who knows what he is doing and why, who has a clear picture of where the sacrifice is leading and who trusts that the destination will justify the journey. He arrived at the destination. The house was large. The cars were impressive. The name was respected in the way that money makes names respected, not always warmly, not always genuinely, but reliably and widely. He sat at tables where decisions were made. He was invited to things. People spoke carefully in his presence and carefully about him in his absence, which is a form of power that many people spend their lives pursuing without examining whether they actually want it or simply want to be the kind of person who has it. From the outside, Haroun's life was a success in the fullest sense of the word as the world uses it. From the inside, it was a different geography entirely. He could not sleep. Not the mild, occasional insomnia of a busy person. The deep, chronic, middle-of-the-night wakefulness of a man whose mind had been trained for decades to find problems and never learned to stop. He would lie in his large bed in his large house and his brain would run its inventory. The investment that was underperforming, the business partner whose loyalty he was not entirely certain of, the deal that had not yet closed, the one that had closed but not as well as it should have. He had more than enough. He had, by any objective standard, far more than enough. And yet the enoughness did not register anywhere inside him as a feeling. It registered as a number. Numbers can always be larger. There is no number at which a mind trained on accumulation finally rests. He had a doctor who told him his blood pressure was dangerous and that he needed to reduce his stress. He nodded and took the medication and did not reduce his stress because he did not know how to reduce his stress without reducing himself, because stress and striving had become, over decades of successful application, the same thing. The striving had produced everything he had. Removing it felt like removing the engine from a car and expecting the car to still move. His body was sending him messages he had learned, through long practice, to treat as inconveniences rather than information. He had a wife. He had children. They lived in the large house together and the living was comfortable and organized and largely silent in the way that households become silent when the people in them have stopped expecting genuine connection from each other and have settled into the parallel loneliness of people who share a space without sharing a life. He loved his wife in the sense that he had no desire to be without her. He was not sure he knew her anymore, not the current version of her, the person she had become while he was building the thing that was supposed to be for both of them. His children were well-dressed and well-schooled and slightly wary of him in the way that children become wary of a parent who is often absent and occasionally explosive and whose attention, when it does arrive, carries the weight of high expectation rather than simple warmth. He was surrounded by people and he was lonely. He had everything he had worked for and he could not feel it. He had arrived at every destination he had set for himself and found that arriving did not feel the way the journey had promised it would feel. And he was bewildered by this, genuinely, deeply bewildered, because he had done everything correctly. He had followed the map that success is supposed to provide. And the map had brought him here, to this large house, to this sleepless 3 in the morning, to this pressing weight on his chest that had no name and no remedy he had yet found. The poor man's name was Idris. He lived across the town in a house that was small in the way that small houses are small, not apologetically, not as a statement of failure, just small, with thin walls and a roof that needed attention and a garden that was less a garden than a patch of ground where things grew because the ground was good and Idris let them. He worked with his hands. He repaired things, furniture, mostly, and sometimes other people's broken objects of various kinds, brought to him because he was known in the neighborhood as someone who could fix what others thought was beyond fixing. He did not earn a great deal. He earned enough, which is a different thing, and a thing that is more difficult to achieve than it sounds because enough requires knowing what enough is, and most people never stop to figure that out. Idris woke early. Not because an alarm drove him out of sleep into the anxious machinery of the day, but because early morning was his favorite part and sleep, however welcome, was competition for it. He would make tea, the same cup, the same slow process every morning, which was itself a form of meditation without the name, and he would sit in the small garden while the light changed and the birds sorted out their business and the day arranged itself in the particular way that days arrange themselves when you are present for their beginning rather than launched into their middle by the imperative of schedule. He was not without difficulty. He had known grief. His wife had been sick for a long time some years earlier, and the sickness had taken from him something that could not be replaced, and he had found his way through the taking not because he was stoic or because he had a philosophy that protected him from pain but because he had people, actual relationships, the kind that had been built over years of genuine presence and genuine interest and genuine willingness to show up for others in the ordinary unremarkable ways that genuine relationships are actually built. When his wife was sick, these people came. They brought food and they sat in the small house and they were not helpful in any efficiently organized way. They were simply present. And presence, it turned out, was what was needed. He had less than Haroun by every measurable standard. He had more than Haroun in every standard that cannot be easily measured. He had the particular wealth of a person who knows who loves them and is not confused about this. The particular wealth of a person who likes who they are when they are alone with themselves, not in a self-congratulatory way, just in the quiet, functional, sufficient way of someone who has not built a self that they need to maintain through external validation. He was not impressive. He was not admired by people who did not know him personally. The world had no particular interest in Idris. And Idris, having made his peace with this long ago, had no particular need for the world's interest. The two men met, as people meet in small towns, through proximity and through the particular friction that proximity eventually produces. Haroun's car had broken down, not the car itself, something attached to the car, some interior element that the expensive mechanics had repaired twice without permanently solving, and someone in Haroun's household mentioned Idris as a person who was good with such things. Haroun came to the small house slightly condescendingly, in the way that very wealthy people sometimes approach the skilled poor, as someone accessing a service, maintaining appropriate distance, prepared to pay well and be on his way. Idris fixed the thing. They drank tea while waiting for the fix to be confirmed. And something happened in the drinking of the tea, in the small garden, in the particular quality of Idris's attention, which was unhurried and genuine in a way that Haroun could not name but immediately felt as a contrast to most of the human interaction his wealth tended to produce. People in Haroun's world paid attention to him the way people pay attention to something they want something from. Idris paid attention to him the way a person pays attention to someone they find genuinely interesting. The distinction was subtle and it hit Haroun like a physical thing. He came back. Not for the car. He came back because the tea had been the best he had drunk in years and he could not fully explain why. Because the tea was not exceptional in any technical sense and the garden was small and the furniture in it was not expensive. He came back because for 40 minutes in that garden he had not been thinking about the underperforming investment or the uncertain partner or the deal not yet closed. He had been, and the word felt strange when he tried to apply it to himself, simply here. They began to talk. Really talk, The way that people talk when there is no performance involved, when neither person has anything to gain from the impression they are making and therefore can afford to stop making one. Haroun found himself saying things he had not said to anyone, not his wife, not his doctor, not the expensive therapist he had seen for 6 months and who had been professionally excellent and had not helped him at all, for reasons he now began to understand had more to do with him than with the therapist. He told Idris he was not happy. He said it the way you say something you have known for a long time but never put into words, with the particular relief and vulnerability of a person who has been holding a true thing in silence long enough that saying it aloud feels almost reckless. He said, "I have everything I ever wanted and I cannot feel any of it." Idris was quiet for a moment. He refilled the teacups. Then he said something that Haroun would think about for a long time after. He said, "You have been spending your whole life getting to where you are. When did you last spend a day being where you are?" Haroun did not have an answer. The question sat in him like a stone dropped in water, sending circles outward in every direction, reaching the edges of things he had not examined in years. He wanted to know Idris's secret. This was how he framed it, the way that wealthy people who have solved every technical problem sometimes frame questions about the untechnical, as if happiness were a system and Idris had found the instructions that Haroun had misplaced. Idris smiled at this framing and gently declined it. He said he had no secret. He said he was not particularly wise and had not lived a life of particular virtue and had made plenty of mistakes of his own that he was still, in various ways, working through. He said the only thing he knew, from living inside his own life with as much honest attention as he could manage, was that the things that made him feel alive were mostly small and mostly free and almost always involved either making something with his hands or being genuinely present with another person. Making and connecting. These two things, Idris said, were the ones he came back to whenever he had lost himself. Not as a philosophy. Not as a system. Just as observations from the inside of one particular life, offered without the claim that they applied universally. But perhaps they applied here. Haroun could look at them and see. Haroun did look at them. He took them home in his expensive car and he sat with them in his large house and he held them against the life he had built and felt, with a clarity that his successful years had not provided, the specific shape of what was missing. Not money. Not achievement. Not the next thing on the list of things that were supposed to make the difference. Presence. Connection. The experience of making something with his hands rather than making something with his money, which produced objects rather than the satisfaction of making and which left him the same person he had been before the object arrived. He started slowly. He did not have a dramatic conversion. He did not sell the large house or give away the wealth or take up an ascetic life that would have been, in its own way, another performance. He started by having dinner with his family without his phone on the table. He started by asking his wife questions he had stopped asking. Not strategic questions, not logistical questions, just the questions of genuine curiosity about what she was thinking and what she cared about and what she had noticed lately. He started by spending Saturday mornings in the workshop where Idris worked, learning, for the first time in his adult life, how to be a beginner. How to be incompetent at something without it threatening his identity. How to make something with his hands and have it be imperfect and be the person who made it anyway. He did not become Idris. He was not trying to become Idris. Idris's life was Idris's life, shaped by Idris's specific history and specific nature. And what worked for Idris was not a template that could simply be transferred. What Haroun was trying to do was something different, to find, within his own life, with his own specific circumstances, the things that had the quality that Idris's life had. The aliveness. The presence. The sense of being here, in this moment, doing this thing, connected to this person, without the permanent forward motion that had made him a successful man and a hollow one. It was not a complete transformation. He still lost sleep sometimes. The business still demanded things that were not always good for him. The habits of decades do not dissolve in months. But there was a change. His wife felt it. His children felt it, in the way children feel things before they have words for them, in the quality of his attention when he was with them, in the degree to which he was actually there. He felt it himself in the mornings, which had begun to have a different quality, not the launched into anxiety of the previous years, but something slightly softer and slightly more his own. He went back to Idris often. Not always to talk. Sometimes just to sit in the garden with the tea and the birds and the light changing and the day beginning in the particular way it begins when you are present for it. Idris was always there, mostly. He was a person who was where he said he would be, which is itself a form of wealth that Haroun had not previously counted. The rich man became less miserable. The happy man remained happy, in his particular, undramatic, completely unimpressive way. Neither of them solved anything permanently. Neither of them found the answer to the question that civilization has been asking since it began. But they sat together in a small garden, on two ordinary chairs, and they drank tea and talked honestly and listened genuinely. And in the doing of it both of them had, for the duration of the afternoon, exactly what they needed. Which was, it turned out, not very different for one man than for the other. Which was, when you looked at it closely and honestly, not very complicated. Which was simply this. Being here. Being known. Being present in a life rather than constantly building one. The money made some things easier and it did not make this easier. The poverty made some things harder and it did not make this harder. The thing was available to both of them, equally, in the same afternoon, in the same small garden, in the same cups of tea. The only question was whether you stopped long enough to pick it up.